Rear foot elevated squat is an exercise I see being done a lot, and very seldomly do I see it being done what I would say correctly. Exercise made famous by legendary strength and conditioning coach Michael Boyle. The irony is he's taken that exercise out of most of his programming. More on that later on, but let's get on to how to do the rear foot elevated squat. This exercise is a great semi-single leg exercise, and it's a great midpoint to a true single leg squat. Like the bilateral brother, the back squat, it works the quads, the glutes, the adductors, and to a lesser degree, the hamstrings. The way I treat this exercise is somewhere between a forward and vertical propulsion exercise. That's the mindset. The trouble with this exercise, though, is that it's very easy to cheat yourself and chase loads. And this just detracts from what is a great exercise. And ultimately, you lose the majority of the benefits and increase your risk of injury if you do the exercise incorrectly. Let's start with the setup. So this is by far the best way to do this exercise. You'll mostly see people in the gym doing this with their foot on a bench. But humans, unlike benches, are generally lots of different heights. And if you use a bench, you're forced to use the bench, and it adjusts your body position as opposed to you adjusting to the body position of the bench. With this, you have different settings where you can change the height and you can get it perfectly set up to the right technique and also your level of flexibility. So the height of the rear leg really depends. Like I say, in an ideal world, you have this roller, and the roller allows your foot to go around the top. That gives us a solution and a problem, because a lot of time, like I said, people chase loads and they put too much weight on the back foot. The roller is there to allow as a guide for what is doing the most work, the front leg. So you have two different options. You can adjust the height to depend on how strong you are in a movement, but also you can adjust the roller to adjust to your level of flexibility. The height of the roller really depends on two different things. It depends on your flexibility and also the placement of your front foot. In an ideal world, you want the height of the back foot to be high enough not to cause a distortion in your technique, but high enough to allow you to put a small amount of weight, but also to angle your weight forward. So I'll show you from the side. Normally I would go with a pad under the knee just to add a bit of a touch point, to add a bit of safety to the knee as well. All right, leg goes forward, rear foot goes on, and you want to start with a straight back and a straight shin from the knee down to the ankle. From this position, you're going to lean forward slightly, but you're going to maintain a straight line between the shoulder, the hip, and the knee. If you're too far to the back, you're going to end up with a shin that points too far forward, and you'll end up with a cramped position. If you're too long, you're going to end up having to lean forward, and you'll end up with a really big stretch on the hip. You don't want this. You want to feel as if 80 to 90% of the weight is going to be on this front leg. So it's from this position, vertical shin, up nice and tall with the back, lean forward slightly, weight is reduced on this back foot. From that position is where you start the movement. So let's talk about the different stages of the movement. I'm in this position, I'm leaning forward slightly. My visualization when I drive forward on this is I almost want to feel as if I'm about to step forward out of the movement. This way, I get my weight distribution and the load going through the leg, which if you were to imagine just two legs on this would be in a back squat position. I wouldn't be totally vertical on the back squat, and I wouldn't be like this on the back squat. It's from this position. So weight is shifted forward, head is up, and I'm driving forward. Now, the other two parts to this movement are what happens with this foot in terms of weight distribution and what happens with weight distribution on the back leg. Your back foot is there to babysit the movement. You're babysitting the weight that is on the front foot. It's there to act as a balance point and there to help you align yourself, but it's not there to be pressed on. The other part of this is the weight distribution on the front foot. With most squats, you start and you put your weight into the midfoot and heel. With this, because it's a bit more of a quad dominant movement, although you use your glutes a lot in this movement, I prefer, like I said, this to be a diagonal stroke vertical or forward stroke vertical propulsion exercise. I'm moving diagonally into the movement because I want to feel as if I'm driving forward. And for that reason, the weight distribution goes from not being on the heel to the mid to front foot of the movement, but not so much that I raise my toes. I want to be able to keep this firmly on the floor, but I want to be able to drive forward. And the back foot is very light on the back. Down, drive, forward. Now this weight distribution is very important, and this is ultimately why Coach Boyle took this rear foot elevated squat out of his main programming, because what he realized is that people were, he called it gaming the system. They were getting heavier and heavier in the weights, and they were moving from basically 80 to 90% on the front foot to more like, 65, 35. And the way you can tell this is by what happens to your back leg. If you set this up in front of a mirror, you can see the difference of what happens. It's very easy to see, especially as a trainer watching for your clients. What you will see is if they set up from this position, if the weight is too heavy, you'll notice this back foot internally rotate as they press down. This is something you see a lot. Down and drive as they put the pressure on. This is something that to me takes away from the movement too much. So when you do this movement, you have to be very strict with yourself, and it makes it into a very tough exercise, both physically and mentally. The way I help to do this is to try and take the back foot out of the movement even more. I said it babysits the roller. In reality, I'm going to try and take my foot off for as long as I can in this movement. So the movement would look like this. Let's start from the setup position of up, down, lean forward. I've driven up. Now when I get to the top, I'm going to take this foot off for as long as I can, or the lightest possible touch. I like to lift it off because my balance is pretty good, but also if I'm not touching it, I'm not using it. And I'm going to keep my back foot elevated for as long as I can before it touches the roller. So I'll be from this position, I'll be driving down, touches, I drive, and I lift off as soon as I can. That makes a massive difference to the difficulty of the movement. The trade-off is as it gets tougher and tougher, you're likely to lose your balance and wobble a bit more. So there'll be a cut-off where you have to keep the leg in contact. But once again, it's light touch. I'm lifting, I'm lifting, I'm lifting. I drive. I'm up, hold. 1, 2, touch, drive, and up. So let's go over the 3 most common errors I see with this setup. The first one I've already discussed is too long a step. It detracts from the movement, and if you don't have flexible hip flexors, this puts a lot of stress on the hip flexor. I've injured my hip flexor doing this in the past. Doesn't matter about the height of the bar. If it's too far forward, you get this unnatural stretch, and you end up, because the leg is up back, it ends up dragging you back onto the bar, whereas in reality, you can move in this way. Second issue I see is a bar that is too high at the back. Be it a roller, be it a bench, be it an Olympic bar, be it a Smith machine, it all ends up being the same. Is that you have too far to go on the movement. When you get too far, it forces you to be dragged back, puts a lot of stress on the hip flexor, puts a lot of tension there, and again, it throws you forward too much to the point where all the weight now is on the front foot, and I'm having to lift, and you can see this rear foot lifting off. Remember, the weight on the front foot is minimal, but there should still be contact. And obviously, the third and final is too much back foot pressure. Think of this as 80-20, and you got the exercise right. Otherwise, you may as well just do bilateral squats or lunges. So let's look at some alternative setups to this exercise. My favorite setup is to use a leg extension. That's probably the only use there really is for a leg extension, is to do rear foot elevated squats, and that will just piss people off. But if you're in a quiet gym, you don't mind the looks, I would do it. The roller on the leg extension serves the same purpose as this. You can adjust the height, you can move it backwards and forwards. It might be a little bit more cramped, but you have the same basic outcome. The next option is to use an Olympic bar on a squat rack. Set it low, counterweight it, and use a foam roller with a hole in on the outside of the Olympic bar. The theme with the first 2 of these exercises, alternatives, is they have a roller that moves with the foot. Because if the roller doesn't move, you tend to hook onto it with the feet and apply too much pressure to the back leg, and you ruin the movement. So ideally, you want something that rotates. And this is why you shouldn't use a bench, because a bench doesn't allow any rotation. And even worse, your ankle goes straight, puts lots of pressure on the top of the ankle, which isn't good. Now, obviously, the other variations that come to this exercise are what equipment you use to make the exercise more difficult. For this, it comes down to the obvious things. You can hold kettlebells, you can hold them high, you can hold them low, you can hold them single, you can hold them on the opposite side or same side to create different kind of core engagement in the movement. Hold them by the side. You can also use bands around the foot and over the shoulder to create accommodating resistance, and you can also turn this into a more explosive exercise. There are lots of different variations. Variations I don't like on this are barbells across the shoulder, front squat versions. I don't like anything where you can't dump your equipment and save yourself from falling over. So that's it, simple variations for what is one of the best exercises you can do for overall leg and athletic development, as long as you do it correctly, you don't cheat yourself, and you don't chase numbers. Set it up for success, create distance, the right height, the right angle, and the right intention. Rear foot elevated squats.